Hello everybody, welcome back to our virtual classroom and another lesson in our trades training video series. I'm Joe Carswell, and this session is all about a hand tool we use to apply paint. That's a brush. So let's get right into it. First, let me give a thank you to Benjamin Moore for the financial support that's made this video possible. To start with, let's go over the anatomy of a brush. It's very important when we talk about them to understand how they're put together. So if you look at the presentation, we've labeled all of these parts. We've got the handle. This feature on the brush takes up a lot of the dimension of the brush, but it's not actually where we hold this brush by. We're going to get into that more when we talk about the techniques. The handle is generally out of wood. It's going to be made of a lot of different shapes. We're going to go over those. The rest of the brush is called the brush head. So if I was to put a brush up here in my close-up box, you can get a look at this. This whole area here we're going to call the brush head. It is going to include a lot of the parts that are in this presentation and labeled. One is going to be the ferrule. That is the metal band that is going to hold what is the bristles. That's all of these long parts that are going to carry paint and transfer it to the surface. And the last part of this brush to talk about is the special ends. This is the working end of this brush, and the tips are very specialized and well engineered. So let's get into this a little deeper. Here we have all of our different handles. They give them different names. These have come from tradition and evolution of painting, and a lot of painters have specific ones that they like or dislike, and a lot of them will be paired with certain brush heads or certain styles of brushes. So you're looking at here, if you look at the left side of your presentation, those are very long, narrow handles. A lot of these you're going to find on your detail brushes. You have a rat tail, which is very long and narrow. You've got a dowel, which is more round, but also long and narrow. And then there's the sash handle. That's going to be a little flatter than the other two. All of these are made to make a detail brush work well and under control. The ones on the right are more for larger brushes. Shasta is an old-fashioned style that is a downsized handle for a larger brush head. This one is a little harder to find these days and is a very traditional style. You also see a wall brush handle. These are large brush handles for very large brushes. We're going to look at one of those a little closer later on in the presentation. And the last brush handle here you see is a short handle. This is specialized for getting into very tight spaces. So let's move on. Here we have the second component of our brush, and we have a much closer look at it. This is the metal band we call the ferrule. It can be made of different materials. It's always metal, and you see a version here in stainless steel and a plated version of a ferrule. The reason we need a good quality ferrule that's either stainless steel or plated steel is because we don't want these to rust. As soon as you get rust in your ferrule, it's going to end up in your bristles and then in your paint. This is going to ruin your paint job, and we need to avoid that. So a good quality brush is going to have either a stainless or a plated ferrule. I've got an example of both of these. So here you see my plated ferrule, and here you see my stainless ferrule. These are quality brushes, and therefore these ferrules will last a long time. We expect a good long life out of these brushes. That's where the quality comes in. Next, we're looking at brush head types. There's a couple of categories here. One is going to be an angled brush head. The other one's going to be squared. As you can see, there is a slight angle to the angled one. It's not severe, but that tiny angle makes a huge difference on how we can use this brush and the control we can have, specifically when we're talking about hard edges or we're trying to cut in lines. Often when we're painting, especially with brushes, we're working very close to edges and we are trying to cut or make a nice clean paint line. That angle on that brush is going to be the go-to choice to get that job done. If we're not working in that specific situation or we have a larger area to work on, a squared head brush might be the best option. Brush width is another aspect to talk about. Brushes are going to come in a variety of widths, and here you see three examples. You're looking at a 1 inch, a 2 inch, and a 3 inch brush. They can go all the way up to 6 inches, and you're going to choose the brush you need for the specific job you're going to do. keeping in mind what you really want is you want the most paint transfer for the job that you're doing, but you need the most control of that brush. The larger the brush, generally the harder it's going to be to control. The smaller the brush, the less paint you can transfer. As painters, they're always thinking of how to be the most productive at whatever they're doing. So the choice of the tool as far as brush width is a major consideration for whatever we're doing at all times. A painter is going to have a lot of different widths and styles of brushes, and they're going to choose whichever one they need at whatever moment they need it. Another aspect of brushes to talk about is the thickness of the brush. So if we look at a brush from the side, we're going to see that the brush head is going to get thinner or thicker depending on the style, the configuration, and how the brush is made. Here you're looking at 3 different thicknesses of brushes. What the thickness is going to do is change the volume of paint that can be transferred, that can be loaded on the brush and unloaded onto the surface. And of course, this translates to productivity as well when we're talking about painters, so this is a consideration. And obviously, we need to consider the area and how much area we're working, and also the thickness of the brush that suits that area. One other aspect of brushes that's related to thickness is going to be the taper of the brush. Tapers on brushes are going to allow us a lot of control right at the working end where the tips are. I can show you, these brushes are new and they're dry, but I want to give you a close-up of the difference of a taper in a brush. And as you can see, both of these brushes have taper. When you wet them or you put paint or solvent on them, they're going to be much more of a point at the end. A brush that's not tapered is not going to give us the kind of control we want when we're talking about working near edges. And very often with brushes, that's exactly what we're doing, is working near perimeter edges, in corners, around trim, that kind of a thing. So taper on the brush, on the presentation, it's very well spelled out, the difference in a tapered brush and a non-tapered brush. So you can see that chisel point, or that very precise point at the end, is going to allow us to make a very nice edge when we're talking about painting near an edge or a detail. Let's get into some materials that the bristles are made of. This is going to affect the way the brush works and what materials we can use it with, starting with a natural bristle brush. So natural bristle brushes are made of animal hair. That's either going to be hog's hair or ox hair. And these type of brushes need to be used exclusively with oil-based paints. We're going to clean them with solvents, and they should under no circumstances be used with any water-based paints. So your natural bristle brushes will work with any solvent-based paints and need to be cleaned with solvents. Any water added to this brush can ruin it, so keep that in mind. Moving on, the other major category of brush bristle materials are going to be synthetics. And synthetics are man-made. They're not made from animal hair. These are much more versatile, and they can be engineered and used in a lot of different situations. Here you see a synthetic brush that is made of either nylon or polyester. That's our main materials we're going to add to a synthetic bristle brush. And these bristles are going to be good for water-based paints. Starting with nylon bristles, they tend to be softer than polyester. They're going to hold a lot of paint, but they have this reputation to kind of get soft and mushy in warm weather and with a lot of use. So they're not necessarily considered the most firm brush. And here's a good time to talk about the firmness of brushes, because the firmness of a brush is going to be a manufacturer's specific design for that brush. They're going to be rated in their firmness when you buy them, and they're going to allow you, depending on the firmness, a certain feel that painters are going to become very accustomed to. Also, the paint that you use is going to affect how firm of a brush you need to apply it. So you as the painter get to make the decision how firm of a brush you want to use. One way that you can accomplish firmness or softness of a brush is by mixing different materials, and nylon is considered a soft material for bristles. Polyester, on the other hand, is more of a firm bristle. This one has a reputation for being a little harder to clean. It doesn't soak up paint as well as nylon, but it is a great control bristle. It has a lot of firmness to it, and that's why it's added to bristles or brush heads. The best thing to do, and a lot of manufacturers are doing this now, is combining our nylon and our polyester bristles in specific mixes, and each manufacturer is going to do this a little differently. So now we have a blend of those two materials. We can get the pros out of each material, and we combine them into an ideal tool. So here you're looking at a nylon and polyester blend. A lot of my brushes here are blends of synthetic nylon and polyester, and you can tell these brushes by the sort of mixed color of the bristles in the brush. This is an indication that there are nylon and polyester in there. They're going to be different firmnesses based on the blend of the two materials and other things that the manufacturer does to the brush. And this is going to be the ideal situation for water-based paints. A lot of these brushes can also be used for oil-based paints, but keep in mind the natural bristle brush is the preferred one for the oil-based paints. Moving on to the last aspect of the brush, let's talk about the tips or the ends of the bristles. These are what I call the working end of the brush. This is the point of contact of the brush to the surface at all times. This is a very important part, and the manufacturers of brushes have spent a lot of time working on better ways to tip brushes. There's a couple of different ends on bristles to talk about. One is going to be tipped filaments, which is going to be a synthetic bristle, and then you're going to have flagged filaments. Flagged is another process we're going to go through. Let's look at the tipped ones here. So tipped filaments are easy to identify because if you look at this brush and even this brush, the very ends of these brushes have a different color on them. These are actually have been chemically treated to turn the ends of the bristles into very sharp points. If you look at them with a microscope or with a magnifying glass, you would see this point that it comes to these ends. So the very end changes colors, it's been chemically dipped, and this is going to turn that into a point, each one of those bristles into a very fine needle point. What this does, it allows us a lot of control where those tips meet the surface, and it will give us that very fine finish that we're looking for in a brush. If you've ever used a brush and you've created brush marks, that is a very negative aspect of brush painting, and we want to eliminate that as much as possible. We're looking for a smooth finish, and a tipped end on these bristles is a great way to get there. The other type of end is going to be a flagged end. And I'm going to show you, hopefully, I don't think I have, this one here has flagged ends on the tips. And a flagged end is going to be like a straw broom. If you look at the end of a straw broom, they've been mechanically worked so that the ends are split. So what you're doing is you're taking a single bristle and you're splitting it into 2 or 3 parts. So you're making smaller tips, which is also going to collect more paint, transfer more paint. That's always a good thing to do. And it's also going to allow you that fine finish that, say, a tipped end does. This is going to be a natural bristle brush, and these are naturally flagged at the ends. So an animal hair, or even your own hair on your head, over time is going to split on the ends, so this turns into a flagged end, which makes a natural bristle brush work well for that reason. Now let's go over a few common brush types that you will use. Here in the presentation, you're seeing an angled sash brush. It has a sash handle on it, and this one has an angled brush head. I have several of these here. They have that slight angle on them, which is going to make them work very well when we're talking about working near edges and painting complex shapes. Some of these are narrower, some of them are thicker. You can even get an angled brush up to this size. Here's a 3-inch brush. So all of these are versions of an angled sash brush. Typically a sash brush is going to stay in the range of 2.5 inches and under, but they all are used for detailed work, cutting in. And it's also something to mention that a 3-inch brush is kind of a painter's standard. You will work up to and train up to being able to use a 3-inch brush in almost any situation. Of course, if you're painting any kind of trim that's narrower than 3 inches, it would not make any sense to try to force that wider brush on that material. This is going to be the opposite end of that brush. So here we're looking at a wall brush, and a wall brush is going to be 180 degrees from that. It has a very wide handle, very big brush head, very wide brush head, very thick brush head, and it's squared at the end. So what you have here is a brush that is engineered for doing very large surface work and doing it very quickly and productively. These brushes will hold a lot of paint. They will transfer it very well, but not the greatest brush to use in small spaces or trying to cut long continuous lines. That on the presentation is a very specific kind of novelty brush, but might be the one you need at the moment you need it. If you notice, this has an angled brush head. It has a typical width of 2 inches, but the handle is cut very short. It's oftentimes we need to work in very tight spaces, and by eliminating this handle, we're able to put this brush and maneuver it in very specific and tight spaces. So you would not use this brush all day unless you were working in those tight spaces, but it might be the only one that will work in a specific location. One other thing to mention is this handle is made of flexible rubber. So even if this handle's too long, it might flex and you can bend it into wherever you need to use it. Here is a brush to talk about. It is called a chiseled brush, chiseled wedge brush. And as you see, the angle on this brush is from front to back, not this direction. And this is a variation on an angled head brush. Some people like them for cutting in lines and doing detailed work. The benefit of this brush is you get the width out of the brush that you don't get from a typical brush of the same width. As you can see, it's almost twice as wide. So we're going to be able to transfer a lot more paint, but it's going to offer you that angle that gives you the control you're looking for that an angled head usually gives you. One more brush to talk about is a chip brush, and these are made with natural bristles, but they're made very poorly. And a lot of times, if you've ever used a chip brush, you're pulling these bristles out of your paint because they're not held in very well. Very low quality brushes, not good for quality professional work, but sometimes if you're doing something where that doesn't matter, it can be used. Sometimes these are good, larger versions for cleaning dust off of baseboards, that kind of thing. So this kind of brush would never be pulled out for a quality finish, but might do some job for you in the painting process that doesn't relate to that final finish. So here is a list of terms used when we're talking about painting. And as always, I like to stress this idea of learning the language of building and using it on the job site, especially when we're talking about skilled trades like painting. So I hope you've learned something about this very basic hand tool we use to distribute paint to a surface and use to make detail work with painting. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson and we'll talk about rollers. This video is a production of Trade Skills U, all rights reserved. If you provide instruction in the construction trades and have a need for videos like these, please contact us at tradeskillsu.com.